Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4, playing some World of Warships Legends. Today we'll be taking a look at another premium ship. This time it is the Tier 6 Soviet battleship Poltava. With this review we're going to start out with analysis, talk about commanders, run down the stats, and finish off with a bit of gameplay. Like always, there should be a list of time codes down in the description if you want to skip around. But before we jump into the analysis, I do want to say, for those of you who come here for the history, sorry, there's not much to say on this one, since this ship never existed. And frankly, in trying to research it, the summary given by Wargaming, specifically Prince Blip, appears to be the most comprehensive look at this boat available in English, so I have left a link to that down in the description as well. Naturally, when I saw the Poltava's turning circle and thought about running around with 14-inch guns, I thought, well, at least you don't have to think too hard about this one, TacticAngel, because it's always healthy to talk to yourself in third person, let alone with a moniker you made up yourself. But all of that aside, I actually found that I like this ship. Perhaps a little harder to play than the Zinop, in that you simply can't ignore that a lot of your targets do actually have armor. The Poltava is a ship that I found a lot more comfortable to play, and that is in spite of the fact that it is quite easily the worst turning ship in the game right now. With faster turrets, the 14-inch guns are surprisingly punchy as long as you're taking shots at things at medium or close range and practicing good shot discipline. That said, she's also not a very easy ship to play because it is exceptionally cumbersome, and though tough when appropriately angled, if you don't or can't for whatever reason maintain those angles, then it is very, very easy to take game-ending amounts of damage in this ship. When I say a good angle, I do mean always try to present at least a 45, but preferably a 60-degree angle to your opponents. And actually, that 60-degree angle is really easy to show your opponents if you're trying to kite away from them. Unless you've done something to your speed, you also have a pretty decent control over the range of those engagements in a kiting situation. Depending on what you're facing, inviting shots into the side of your ship at the right angle actually isn't a terrible idea. You're going to have to make some judgments about how smart you think your opponent is playing. Though the ship has an icebreaker bow, meaning a very heavy lower front plate, I suspect that the upper bow is actually only 25 millimeters, because I have been penetrated frontally by 15-inch guns. Again, an armor viewer would be great here. This hasn't resulted in anything too catastrophic, though I'm sure it's possible, but you'll definitely see an example of that later in this video. The idea there would be to try to force a bounce chance when normally they would just score a penetration through the front of your ship. In any case, the ship is very good at pushing an objective, probably preferring to do combat in the 8 to 10 kilometer range, but you have to be prepared to legitimately brawl in her as well. To that end, your maneuverability is not going to help you at all there. To make up for this, I choose engine mod, so I can make myself a little bit more unpredictable for all those pesky little boats shooting danger pylons at me. But of course, in this ship, just like anything else, there's no substitute for excellent situational awareness, and you're going to really need that if you want to use this ship. The Poltava is also very quick, giving you a lot more flexibility in where you position yourself and allowing you to play the flanks a little bit more than you traditionally can in a battleship, because you can actually make it back to the center or even all the way across the map in something at least approaching a reasonable amount of time. As far as the commanders go for the Poltava, similar to other Russian battleships, your best bet here is Mikhail Kedrov. He will grant you the most responsive turrets and the highest rate of fire at ranges where your battleship will actually be very effective if you want that. The most options for how to avoid ongoing damage from fire or floods, and of course he has access to both the largest number of heals as well as the best heals that you're going to find on a Russian battleship. Von Essen is actually a pretty good choice for Russian battleships. You are going to give yourself a little boost to actually penetrating ships by making a few more degrees of angle, a penetration rather than subject to a bounce. With smaller guns, this does become an even more useful ability since you don't overmatch anywhere near as many ships with the Poltava like the Zinop does. It is also very, very easy to get 5 damage control parties, plus a third heal in Von Essen, making him a very solid choice. I would not personally recommend Galler because most of his kit is probably going to encourage you to play this ship poorly. In any case, if you are a control freak, old dislocated shoulder Lev Galler will give you the greatest accuracy. This is reasonably useful at medium range, mostly unnecessary at short range, but his abilities are not nearly enough to make this an accurate battleship at long or extended ranges. Most of this accuracy does come at the expense of your already terrible maneuverability, while also limiting your survivability. Honestly, I consider this such an unattractive option that I only took this out in bot battles just to see how it felt, since I didn't really want to risk it against opponents with genuine human creativity. Gunnery was a little bit better, and certainly moving in a straight line was very doable, but I hope you enjoy being on fire, and I wouldn't plan on making too many turns with Galler. As we talk about the stats, all of the numbers that you're going to see on the screen are influenced by this particular build with Kedrov. It's going to have a noticeable effect on some numbers, mostly reload speed and turret traverse. But when comparing the Poltava to the Sinop, I was looking at the same ships with the same commander and the same equipment. The Poltava comes in at just over 59,000 hit points. This is actually surprisingly low considering how large the ship is, and 5,900 points less than you'll find on a similarly equipped Sinop. In spite of this, the Poltava does have a better armor arrangement, ranging from 16 to 425 millimeters rather than 12 to 400. And the torpedo reduction here is actually 15% higher than you could expect on the Soviet tech tree battleship. And it is straight up excellent as far as torpedo protection among battleships at Tier 6. The 38% that you see on screen is a result of not the one for nuisance, but Poltava's torpedo reduction is naturally second only to the Colorado if the Poltava was a tech tree battleship. The improved armor scheme is definitely not going to save you from shots into your broadside, but the Poltava can kite very effectively, in part because of this armor and in part because of the gun arrangement. Now moving on to the guns, the armament of the Poltava is on the lighter side in terms of shell caliber, having just 3x3 356mm guns. For anyone counting in traditional naval terms, that's a 14-inch gun, and that is 2 inches, or 50mm, smaller than the Sinop at the same tier. That said, other than its lack of overmatch potential, the smaller guns here hold up pretty well. You do have shorter range, which you would expect, but only lose 200 meters. Though I'm quite sure this is beating a dead horse, those 200 meters are really at a distance where you're unlikely to hit anything, at least in a Russian battleship. Your shells do less damage, 1,600 points per shot in fact, and 550 on the HE side. That said, you somehow manage to keep the excellent 41% fire chance, making your ability to comfortably play as a pyromaniac nearly as good as some other historical figures. The lighter guns would have made for lighter turrets and a faster reload. The 30.6 second traverse that you see here is helped a bit by Kedrov, but it is still 20% faster than you'd see on a comparable Sinop, with a reload speed which is also about 20% faster too. While not specifically related to the stats that you see here, the Poltava does enjoy decent forward gun angles, though you will still have to expose yourself to some damage if you try to engage your rear turret. But you can actually get almost all of your guns on target while maintaining something very close to an auto bounce angle when shooting at targets while kiting away from them. The only difficulty is getting into that position without giving up huge amounts of your life. As a brief note, you do have a much lighter secondary armament than the Russian tech tree ship, but you really don't want to rely on your secondaries for anything in a Russian battleship. And overall, if you forgive the fact that you're going to have to respect that armor is a thing in the game, the overall trade here favors the Poltava considerably. When we get into maneuverability, and though we're still going to talk about this versus the Sinop, it does make sense to point out that these are two of the most cumbersome ships to steer at Tier 6. So while the Sinop is relatively fast, 27 knots or better, the Poltava is a full 2 knots faster, which is very nice when you need to try to quickly relocate because there are either too few or too many enemy ships in your immediate vicinity. The 1,000 meter turning circle here is the only turning circle in the game presently measured in 4 digits, and that is to say it is exceptionally horrible and a full 40 meters worse than the Sinop. You do have a slower rudder shift as well. Here you see 14.5. This is about 2 seconds slower than you'll find on the Sinop. What that basically means is, like I said, it's going to be very hard to dodge torpedoes in any capacity other than moderating your speed, and doing that with engine mod. And one final note, being excessively long, you should count on bleeding a lot of speed in any turn. When we look at concealment, most Russian battleships are on the low side of sea detectability, and the Poltava is no different here. She actually sneaks in as slightly less visible than even the Sinop. That said, 13.6 is only good if you consider that most battleship concealment is just worse. The smaller gun caliber does give you a marked advantage while firing from smoke, an additional 1.7 kilometers over the synop. But still, 12.4 is still a little bit further away than you'd prefer it to be if you had any say in it. A brief mention on consumables. If you're familiar with Russian battleships, which I encourage you to be if you're considering purchasing this ship, then this shouldn't be any sort of surprise. You have 3 consumables, and they are the standard 3 charges for your damage control party, though you can get upwards of 5 depending on your commander and skill choices. You have a similar heal, at least in terms of the percentage of your HP that you regenerate, but since you have considerably less hit points than the synop, you will end up regenerating somewhat less than you would in terms of raw hit points. And finally, you do have exactly the same stats on your catapult fighter when we compare it to the synop. Really, the more interesting thing about this is the hangar system that they've modeled onto the back of the ship, which I really like because it looks like a huge operational pain. First, we have to rotate the rear turret out of the way. Then we use this crane, which isn't quite long enough to reach the plane to get it out of the... Oh. Alright, and let's finally jump into some gameplay. As you can see, we are going to be on Two Brothers. We're starting out in the southwest part of the map. I am going to go ahead and put up my commander on the screen because it's a little different than what we were using before. Two Brothers, not exactly the most dynamic of maps available currently in the game. And then, of course, if you're just tired of it, you can just drive through the middle, where you will probably die. So everybody else who's not specifically trying to kill themselves decides, let's try to figure out how we get across this giant expanse of water. We start the game off on HE because we know we're going to be shooting at the front of some battleships. I can't penetrate the front of a Jean Bar, but I can set him on fire. That will probably force him to use his damage control. And while I'm dealing with that, I'm making sure to also get the most out of my rear turret by targeting that Indianapolis. Now you saw earlier we did catch a fire on that Jean Bart. He must have put it out. Sadly, we do not get him with the second salvo. And this guy is feeling pretty confident in himself. It's nice to see a French battleship moving forward. I think you all know what I mean. In any case, it looks like he's going to start to come around the side here, and I've picked up a little buddy that is doubtless a destroyer. We're going to try to set him on fire one more time before we switch over to some AP. And there's that big hit that I take. I'm going to guess that was 15-inch shells straight through the front bow. It doesn't disable my turret. We don't really take a citadel, but still 12,000 damage is a pretty considerable amount. That Jean Bart has gotten pretty close to us though, and he pays the price. You see, even with 14-inch shells well aimed into the lower part of the ship, you can actually do a pretty incredible amount of damage with these. I decide that that destroyer is probably not going to shoot torpedoes at me, seeing as it is a Minsk, and he's just there to set people on fire and be annoying. I start turning. It is a process. It is a process that maybe my German battleship friend behind me doesn't realize is quite so much of a process, but now we're on fire again, and it happens. We're trying to move up to push this side, and as you see, we're actually kind of leading the charge here, even though we're a tier 6 battleship. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to come up upon first, so I have HE loaded. I was really kind of hoping to get a better shot on that Bismarck because obviously German battleships are fairly susceptible to HE damage. We do land a couple shots. Unfortunately, no fires there. Our heel is off cooldown and we're definitely taking enough damage that we need to use it. So we do pop that. You see we have a Nagato. He is... I'm not really 100% sure. Probably not aware that I was right there, but we make him pay for that with a pretty big hit into the side of his ship. I don't want to turn too far to meet him, so I just put one out there against the Bismarck with my rear turret. We're still taking tons of hits here though. Now I'm going to sprint forward here and bump this island. It's going to give me a little more cover from the right here. I really only need to worry about the Bismarck here. I probably should switch to HE. He is presenting a very nice angle, so I'm not really likely to be able to pen his armor, but I might be able to sneak some shots into the superstructure. We still do walk away with 3,000 damage. A little disappointing there, but I was about to run out of a target, so something's maybe better than nothing. Because I lost the turret there for a while, you can see all three of my guns are actually now on a different timer, which I'm trying not to let bother me. That makes aiming a little weird. A lot of people would choose not to do that. I do put a shell out there on the Kutuzov. We got a nice big juicy citadel out of it, and now you can see this Sinop is showing me broadside too, and though he might not be the best target in terms of range, I decided to take it on him because the Bismarck right in front of me is a lot less susceptible to these guns. It looks like he decided to load the torpedoes and rams another ship. We keep putting shells out there on the Sinop. You can see we've got all sorts of crazy dispersion. Some of those are pretty good, some of them are not so good. At this point, I probably should consider using that, my damage control. But I think I was looking around to see where the Kutuzov's attention was. In any case, we managed to keep pushing into that base. We make it all the way there, and of course the game ends. Pretty short little game, pretty good game though. And this is what I think the Poltava is pretty good at. It's able to push flanks, you're able to take a pretty considerable amount of damage as long as you're angling appropriately. Now for the most part you saw how I angled versus the Jean Bar. The Jean Bar can go straight through the upper part of your bow. That was not something I was prepared for at the time of this game, but a nice learning opportunity. That might be one of those situations where you might want to show them just a little bit more of an angle and hope that they choose to shoot into your side. It might not. It all depends. Certainly you can draw your own conclusions. In any case, he gave us a good opportunity to show off the really nice punchy guns that this ship has. Obviously you saw us on the top of the charts. There's some numbers to show how it does in terms of making credits. In any case, I hope you found this little review helpful, and I'll see you guys on the next one.